Hello, I'm Donna Maria Bordeaux with To Live For. To Live For celebrates, honors, and shares inspirational stories, art, and music from people around the world to spread love, joy, and a positive vibe to help heal our earth and each other. We have the extraordinary privilege to have here with us today Dale Zarrella, who is a world-renowned artist. Thank you so much for being with us.
So my pleasure.
How did you discover your gifts?
Oh my gosh, when I was 11 years old, I discovered my love for sculpting. My dad, he was a farmer and he passed away when I was 6 and my brother was 8. And a race car driver became a father figure to us. And he taught my brother how to build race cars. And so when I was a kid, I for his birthday, I carved into a piece of wood his car for his birthday. And he was such a great, his name was Eddie Flemke, and in the racing world he is renowned. He passed away many years ago, but he was renowned for his mentorship of so many of the great racers in history, and also the great car builders and people in racing, and in actually all forms of work. And he said, "You stick with this kid, it's going to take you somewhere." So when I was sitting in St. Peter's Square about 6 years ago waiting for Pope Benedict, because I had done, I was commissioned to do several pieces of St. Damien of Molokai for the Vatican in Rome, I had about 2 hours to contemplate life, and I went all the way back to that first piece, and it meant so much to have someone of his stature say, "You stick with this kid," and I found my gift. But I was always told, when God takes something away so precious, like a father or anything, and he will always give you back something. So when I discovered my gift of sculpture, I felt it was something that was given. I always felt it was a gift that was given to me.
That's a great story. So your first sculpture was a car.
And then he started showing the other racers and car owners, and they started buying them. So as a little 11, 12, 13-year-old kid to sell these little carvings for $25 a piece, and that was huge back then. And then I started doing owls and different things around. I grew up in New England, Connecticut. So, but then when I was almost 18, my hometown church called, St. Dominic's, and the pastor, and they were building a new church, and he asked me if I would carve a crucifix above the altar of the church. And I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I'm very grateful I did, because the statuary was so impressive, and I never dreamed of doing the works for the Vatican in Rome. But when my dad passed away, his first cousin came from Belgium, and he was a Catholic priest, Father Alphonse Zarrella, and he became a father figure to me also my whole life to this day. And he was the vice rector of the seminary, oldest seminary school in the world, in Leuven, Belgium, and that's where Father Damien, came from in the 1800s. So he told me the story of Damien before I even came to Hawaii, right before I came to Hawaii. So it's quite ironic that I got to do the sculptures of him for the museum.
There's a divine connection there.
Absolutely.
How did you come to have this opportunity to do 2 bronze sculptures for the Vatican?
Well, that's an interesting story, because I always knew I was going to do a sculpture of Damien, Father Damien, and I was on a trip to Honolulu, and I met, sitting next to me, somebody that works at Kalapapa and lives at Kalapapa. Kalapapa is this little peninsula on Molokai where it used to be a leper colony, Hansen's disease, and back in the 1800s and even through to the mid 1900s, it was a colony where people were sent that had the disease, and so he worked down there, and you can go and spend nights down there if you are invited by a resident, only if you are invited by a resident. And so I told him how I always desired to make a sculpture of Damien, and he invited me to come and spend 3 days with he and his wife, and he said, I'll introduce you to Father Felix, the Belgian priest down at Kalapapa at St. Joseph's Church. So I did that, and I brought some of my homemade Belgian chocolate, so that endeared me to him right away. He was willing to give me anything I needed. So he said, you know, they're creating a Father Damien museum in Honolulu. They might want a sculpture, but I was going to do a sculpture anyway. I'm not led by money in my art. If there's something that needs to be done, I create it, no matter what. And so I already knew I was going to do the sculpture. So he said, gave me the phone number of the St. Augustine's Church over in Honolulu, where the Father Damien Museum was being created, and they said, yes, we would love a sculpture. So they said, we don't have any money. And I said, well, that's okay. But then they did set up an account, and it ended up being funded quite quickly by some of my collectors. And ironically, a big chunk of the money came from a Jewish endowment fund by wonderful collectors and supporters of my art. And I thought that was fantastic, because Damien was smiling with that one, because he had a hard time finding the money just to clothe and shelter those people, those poor, sick and dying, over 800 sick and dying people when he first arrived. And the Protestant Church of England ended up sending him some money, which angered the Kingdom of Hawaii as well as the Catholic Church at the time, because it showed that they weren't doing what needed to be done to take care of those people. And here an outside denomination and church started sending him money. So for his statue to be paid for by a Jewish endowment fund, I thought was very funny and quite appropriate. And because Damien is not just a Catholic story, he is a story of humanity. Here is a man that gave his life to help all these sick and dying people. Most people, I've read many stories, firsthand writings of some of the strongest of men. There was one in particular of these Navy doctors that wanted to go down there. They were curious, and they went there, they took one look around, and they just got off that peninsula as quick as they could, because they were so stricken with fear of catching the disease and the ugliness of that disease, instead of seeing the humans that were behind these faces. And Damien, instead, when he went down there and saw the horrors, he was so grateful. He realized, wow, this is why I became a priest, to help these people. This is my purpose in life. And then Mother Marianne, St. Marianne Cope, became St. Marianne Cope. Mother Marianne ended up going down there and taking care of Damien when he was dying of the disease, and then carried on his work. And it was ironic how many people who knew them, that journaled or wrote, said that they had this perpetual little smile on their face most of the time, even amongst all that pain and suffering, because it brought them joy. Their work brought them joy.
They literally gave their life.
Literally gave their life.
Such an inspirational story, and you immortalize their gift to humanity through
Yes,
your work.
and there were men, women, and children that were sent there, taken away from their families. They called them orphans when they were sent there, and I couldn't imagine. And so there were, on so many levels, I could relate to the story of Damien, being a father that raised my daughter, being a child that lost his father, on so many levels. But then also my cousin Al being such a wonderful father figure. I had these great mentors that came into my life that showed me the way. And I was able to pour all of that into that one sculpture. And others. Art imitates life quite often.
It does. You're remarkable and known as a master visionary artist.
I've been called that, and I really appreciate it. But there's something to, when I feel I'm still climbing that mountain of mastery. And just recently somebody called me a master, and I said, well, thank you, but I really rather be referred to as an amateur, because the word is derived from the French word amore, for the love. And I do it completely for the love. So I guess I will always be an amateur.
I love that philosophy. And yesterday when we were having such a nice conversation, you talked about how what we think about creates our reality. And
Absolutely.
how have you and how do you continue to use that philosophy, and what does that mean to you in your life and your work?
Well, we all face difficulties in life, difficult times, and how we handle those and our choices in those times are what truly do define us. And that's one of the great things I do. I am grateful for having grown up in the Catholic Church and having the mentors I did have, because it did teach me the power of prayer and our mantras and our thoughts. You can call it whatever you want, but there is such power in our thoughts. And some years ago, I had gained a certain amount of success in the art world and with the galleries, but along with that came some politics, because I would never allow myself to be controlled as far as contracts and things like that. There are those that if they can't control you, they do want to destroy you. And so instead of allowing it to really bother me, it gave me an opportunity to create a prayer, a mantra. And I sat down and took my time, because I learned a long time ago, you better be very careful what you pray for, because you might get it. And so it started out very long, but then it came down to an essence. And that essence will, and always will be, I asked for the vision to create timeless works of art that inspire people. And I even wrote in there, no matter how complicated those visions are, time-consuming, I knew I was willing to do the work. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to challenge that gift that I was given and see how far I could take it, or it could be taken. And from that day on, like 3 days later, in a large piece of wood, there's a legend of the Maui mermaid. I saw this mermaid seated like she was on the beach in front of a nest of a turtle nest that appeared to be empty, but there was a lone egg down in the bottom that was unhatched, and she picked it up and it hatched in her hand, and that was the moment of the first mermaid. And then before I was done with that, in another giant piece of wood, another mermaid, which you'll see this evening at the art show, the mermaid seated amongst the reef, and 3 turtles swimming around her, adult turtles. She's reaching out to one of them that's swimming up to her, and my thought was that's the one that hatched in her hand many years earlier. And then before I was done with that, another incredible mermaid, and while I was working on that mermaid, I got a commission for 5 pieces for this Frank Lloyd Wright building here on Maui. Any one of them would have been a dream commission, let alone 5. And that Frank Lloyd Wright building, ironically, was supposed to be built in my hometown in Southington, Connecticut by Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller. And
that's amazing.
They actually went into my grandparents' ice cream shop when they were looking at the land. And the booth still exists that they sat in. But anyway, and then the 4th mermaid, and then the commissions for Damien, and then which led into the commissions for the Vatican in Rome of Damien, and then Mother Mary Ann, and for the same museum, and then the bronze for the Vatican, and then the 5th mermaid, and then recently in September the commission of the resurrection sculpture for Pope Francis. So my point is, there truly is power to our thoughts and our prayers and our intentions.
I believe that totally, and you exemplify this amazing human being who has the ability to bring wood and marble sculpture
And bronze
to such life, that
Yeah, it surprises me what comes out.
you have these visions.
Yes. And then I start creating, and then it evolves into something that I could never have dreamed of in the first place.
You follow your excitement and your dreams and your visions, and you bring them to life.
And I follow what's in the wood. You know, people constantly tell me how much patience I have, and they think this takes patience to do these works. And I've really thought about it, and what it does is it takes diligence to do these works. Patience comes in waiting for the pieces of wood to speak. And it could take a split second when I see the piece of wood, or it could take 20 years of having a piece of wood, and then I go and look. That is such a magic part of the process that it astonishes me that I didn't see it. And I don't question it anymore because it's futile, but why didn't I see it years earlier? But when it's ready, it reveals itself.
And is it Saint Damien that has the tear that was in the grain of wood?
Yes. And you know, that's happened many
Remarkable.
times. Magic things like that have happened so many times. I was reading, while I was working on the Damien Koa piece for the museum, I was reading his letters. And I was reading this one letter that he had wrote to his brother about this one child that would keep his yard clean, and the child had the disease, and one day he had to go up top Molokai to finish working on a church, and it took about 5 or 6 days. By the time he got back, this child was really stricken and bedridden and dying. And the child held on until Damien got there and died in his arms. And I couldn't get my head around what he did with that sorrow that he had to have felt on a daily basis, because people were dying daily. And especially a child that has become dear to you, or any child. I came out and I was working on his portrait, the face, and there was a knot right in the forehead that had traveled down the log, and it ended up creating this perfect tear. And
Magical.
I sent pictures to Bishop Silva of Hawaii and Archbishop Gomez because it was so astonishing. And Bishop Silva's great-grandfather lived and died of the disease at Kalapapa, so he was a big part of the project. He's the one that sent the pictures of my clay study to Rome, and that's when they had requested the pieces for the Vatican. That's how that happened.
If you could hear your father, what would he say to you right now, do you think?
Wow. You know, I often wonder that, because my brother also, my brother got taught how to build race cars by our mentor, but my father had an interest in racing stock cars too, and he never got to fulfill that. And he had an interest in carving because he was a hunter and he carved his gun stocks when he was a kid. So I think he looks down on both of us and is very proud of the gift he obviously gave to us, but then we carried on and fulfilled in our own lives that he never got to fulfill in his own.
It's beautiful, and your capacity to transform pain and loss into incredible pieces of work that speak of your humanity and are incredibly inspirational.
Well, we all experience pain and suffering and loss in life, and especially when you're very young. I think I was almost 40 when I realized there was so much I never dealt with, and started doing my work with a wonderful counselor to bring that up and put it in its proper place to be able to move on. And I equate it to like being a plant, and you're in soil that is very hardened, and at some point in your life, it's good to uproot the plant and transplant it into some really good healthy soil so it can then grow. And I'm so glad I did that, because when I did that for my own personal self, it transformed my art, also grew tremendously.
It's beautiful. It's a great analogy. It's a great way to look at it.
And it's a constant process.
It is. We're all ongoing pieces of work.
Yes, we are.
So why is wood your favorite medium, your first love in your...
I think by growing up on the farm, I used to take these long walks constantly with my grandmother, Philomena. She was so incredible, this woman, that and she just passed away a year and a half ago. She was almost 103.
That's amazing.
Yes.
I'm so sorry for your losses.
Well, you know, her funeral was more a celebration of her life, because she was just such an incredible, saintly, wonderful woman. And I used to take walks. I spent so much time with her growing up, because my mom went to work after my dad passed away, and I would spend a lot of time. And it was a huge dairy farm, when we would go and pick the wild blueberries and the raspberries and blackberries, and she knew where all the mushrooms were. She knew all the plants and trees, and
Taught you a lot.
oh my gosh, and she was such an incredible woman. You know, one of the commissions for that Frank Lloyd Wright building was the Kahuna La'au Lapa'au, the healer. And
I would love to see that.
oh my gosh, it's actually, by the Kapuna here, it's the most revered of all the sculptures that I did up there. And I actually was sent in the jungle with this healer just for 3 days to do my studies. I wanted to figure out how to portray the healer. And the Kahuna La'au Lapa'au that I spent time with, he told me about how his grandmother taught him about all the plants, and as we were walking in the forest in Kipahulu. And it brought me right back to my grandmother and our walks and our gatherings.
So many amazing connections.
Oh my gosh. I ended up having this vision of the Kahuna on his way out of the valley and stopping at his favorite little spot to look at what he had gathered and contemplate the people he's going to heal with those roots and berries and plants. And because we would stop and look at what we gathered and think about the things, you know, the blueberry muffins and the pies and all those things that we would make. My grandmother also taught me how to cook, so that's why I have a lot of wonderful dinners with friends and collectors here at my house.
And those walks in the woods, you came to love the
Nature.
wood and nature.
Yes.
And
so that's what ended up transforming, you know, into that Kahuna La'au Lapa'au sculpture. And the Kahuna that was my guide that they hired to be my guide in the project for all 5 sculptures, told me, do not make it any one person. And but my grandmother is in there, and a few other people.
it's very special.
Hawaiians. But she was Polish. She was 100% Polish.
It's very special. And you're a painter too. Your paintings are magical.
Oh my gosh, I never thought I'd be a painter in my life.
Did the turtles inspire you to paint?
They did, because when about, my gosh, 32 years ago, I remember having carved a turtle, and I heard about these people that had this property right on the ocean and these ancient fish ponds, and they would bring in hurt turtles and take care of them in these ancient saltwater fish ponds. And so I called them and I asked if I could come and visit, and so I did. And as Peggy used to tell the story, because it was Peggy and Joe Forgas that owned this property, that it was love at first sight when she opened the door. They never had any children, and they kind of adopted me, and then they put me in charge of taking care of the ponds and the turtles.
You were the caretaker.
I was the caretaker, and my daughter also helped me care for these ponds and the turtles. And so nobody was painting turtles way back then. I would go to Lahaina to the galleries, and I'd see all these wonderful whales and dolphins. All these painters were painting. And so I was up on the mountain one day gathering wood, and I cracked a few ribs gathering wood, and I could hardly breathe the first month. So I decided to try painting. You know, friends would ask me why I didn't, wouldn't try painting, and to me, it was a waste of time. I like third dimension. So my brother ended up getting me the easel, the paints, and gathered all the materials together, and I did this painting of the three turtles that I had, and I was so amazed that I called a buddy of mine, Alan, who's a great guitarist, and I said, Alan, you might want to bring over a guitar. I might be able to play like Eric Clapton, and I don't even know it. But I can't play a tune to save my life. And it didn't really disappoint me that much, because I'm grateful for what I do have. But I tell
How
this.
old were you when you discovered that you
It was about 25 years ago. It was here in Hawaii. And so, let's see, 25. Oh, you want to date me now? Okay, I was 30 years old when I started.
So we're never too old to discover our gifts.
Well, 30, I was really pretty young, but I was amazed, and I really did like the exercise of painting, because it's very meditative and quiet. Sculpting is much more physical, which I love that too. So at night I would paint, and then my collectors started collecting my sculpture, my paintings also, and encouraging me to continue painting, and I really have enjoyed it. I don't do a lot of painting, but I do a little bit.
Oh, they're magical. And what inspired you to honor the Hawaiian culture and heritage?
Oh my gosh. Well, the indigenous people in this world, many of them were so connected to nature, and the Hawaiians certainly were. And my daughter, who I raised, is part Hawaiian, and my grandkids, and but living here in Hawaii and getting to know the forest and the trees and the ocean, and then getting to know some kapuna and kahuna that have kind of gravitated into my life, and that I've gotten to know and become very dear friends with. They've helped me connect. When they had this big celebration for the opening of the Frank Lloyd Wright building, and I was standing in front of the healer sculpture, and a woman, Mrs. Kavena Johnson, she was standing next to me, and she's a very revered Kumuhula teacher and historian. She translated the Kumulipo, the story of creation, for the Hawaiian creation. And she was standing next to me. She didn't know me, but I knew her because she's very well known. And she was looking at the sculpture, and she said, "Isn't this beautiful?" And I was standing next to her. I said, "Thank you." And she looked at me. She said, "You did that?" And I said, "Yes, I had the honor." And she said, "Son, you're not Hawaiian." And then she looked at the sculpture. And then she looked back at me. She said, "Son, you were Hawaiian in another life."
Aww.
And that was the biggest compliment, because I'm always very careful and respectful when I am creating sculptures that have to do with Hawaiian history or the legends, and because I would get these visions and I would create, and but sometimes not knowing why it's coming out like it is coming out. But that was such a wonderful affirmation to have her say that.
That is such a compliment. Very special. What was the sculpture that you used, this sacred Hawaiian wood that isn't usually allowed to be used, right?
Well, actually, I found this grove that was just lying in the lava fields on Ulapalakua property many years ago with the helicopter pilot, a wood called Nayo. We first thought it was sandalwood because it was so fragrant, but we come to find out it was this wood called Nayo. Then I found out that the kahunas used it for medicine, but it didn't surprise me because it had such a powerful energy about it, and these incredible sculptures started coming out of these female faces and goddesses, and then also male forms started coming out of it. Even these incredible sculptures of Merlin that I call Merlin. You know, Merlin was like a kahuna also. You know, he was, you know, we all have that ability to create magic and to heal and to do all those things. Those things are inside of us. They need to be brought out by great mentors that help us on that path. But I remember doing a piece for Deepak Chopra, Merlin, and we talked about the metaphor of Merlin, because he had just finished his first novel, The Return of Merlin. And he spoke about Merlin, how there's a bit of Merlin in all of us, that we all have the ability to create magic. And
You certainly,
I believe that is
you
true.
certainly have done that. You live your mantra, and you have created these absolutely beautiful, timeless pieces of art that are gonna live on and inspire people forever.
Well, that's certainly, yeah. When I stop and think about it, that is a wonderful thing. But I'm usually focused on what I'm creating, because it really is all about the journey and that whole process.
Thank you for sharing your gifts with the world.
You're so welcome.
We are also blessed. Where can we find you? I looked at your website, which is wonderful.
And also Facebook, just DaleZarrella.com, 2 R's, 2 L's, and then on Facebook there's 2 accounts. I have one that's kind of like a business account, and then my personal, but friending me on both of them. I do updates each week. I'm constantly putting pieces up, all the newest works. And then on Sundays I started doing an update out here. And I am going to be putting a webcam up in the next week. And so people can log on and they're going to be able to watch the whale piece evolve, and they can even check out the waves. I'm going to see, maybe they can see the sunset during parts of the year.
The most beautiful art studio I have ever seen.
Yes, I feel very fortunate.
Thank you for the privilege of being here with you. Thanks for being you.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure meeting both of you.